Hello and welcome to the Siwi Sofa, where we sit down with some of the most interesting participants of this year's World Water Week to learn more about the array of water-related issues being discussed this week in Stockholm. My name is Eric Paglia, host of the Siwi Sofa, which is now being streamed live on the Siwi Media Hub. The name of this session is New Business from Disruptive Innovation in Water and Energy. And we're going to be discussing how disruptive technology and management changes the water energy landscape and how new business models can tap its potential for sustainable global development. And joining me here in the sofa, we have two experts on the topic here. We have Dr. David Nielsen, Director of the Water Center at KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, and Östen Ekengren, the Deputy CEO of IVL, Swedish Environment Research Institute. Welcome, gentlemen, to the Siwi Sofa. Very happy to have you here. Perhaps we could start by having you describe a little bit about your respective organizations.
All right. Thank you very much, Eric. It's wonderful to be here. So I'm from KTH, the Royal Institute of Technology, where we have recently started what we call Water Center at KTH. So I'm the director for this new Water Center. And I could just say briefly, it's obviously about water, yes. Okay. But you will also find that water is really dispersed all over a place like a university. You will find so many different competencies all over. So our goal is really, how can we harness all this knowledge across the university to have researchers speak to each other, but also, and more importantly, to speak to the rest of society in a good way. So that's really what the center is about.
In IVL, you're a much more, a much older organization. It's been operating in Sweden for half a century now.
Yeah, we have been running our business 51 years now. We are owned by the Swedish government, 50%, the Swedish industry another 50%. Idea is to do applied research to be a bridge between the basic research and the need in the industry. So connecting with water we have been all time, and today we are running the biggest pilot demo plant in Northern Europe here in Stockholm.
Very good. Now, if we get to the theme of this session of the Siwi Sofa, David, looking back over a long time period, is there really something new and disruptive going on in the water and energy business, or is this just some sort of new catchphrase?
Well, I guess that depends on who you ask, but if you're asking me, I'll tell you.
David.
So, well, you can say that on one level, there's nothing new around what we are seeing now. Because if you look at, over long periods of time, there's always been value out there in the water and energy service chain. And that value landscape has changed over time. So the actors have to adapt, right? So if you remember what the image that we chose for the poster for this session, it was actually it was showing pigs and the pig farming in the in the waste business here in Stockholm 100 years ago. So there was value that was being captured in various ways. So in that sense, there's nothing new that actors have to adapt to, shifting landscapes of value. But from the organizational point of view, if you ask anyone in, say, a water company, or if you ask a municipality, 100 years perspective is perhaps not normally what they work against. And I would say that if you look over a shorter period of time, we are seeing very large changes going on. In fact, there is disruptive innovation going on right now, and it's very drastic in some places. And if I can just say, if you look at how we have built our systems for the past 50, 60, 70 years or so, it's really been about centralized technology that have become better and better and doing what they always have been doing. Very much about linear flows, taking water from the upstream sources, treating it, pumping it to the customers, and then pumping it back to another technological installation, and cleaning it again before you let it out. It's a very linear type of flow. And we've seen that type, or that, shall we say, basic architecture for the past 60, 70, or even longer years. So I would now say that we're seeing this change. And it's changing partly through new technology, but also through a shifting mindset and new business models being able to capture that value that now arises in new parts of the service chain. So there are in fact some very interesting changes going on right now. And maybe just to finalize, we are not talking about water, wastewater and energy. But if you look at the large, shall we say, infrastructural development in regions and cities in our part of the world, you also see some very drastic changes going on in the energy market, for instance. Now we have a situation where renewable energy has become cheaper on the margin than the old fossil energy. So in fact this changes very much about the business and the logic about large organizations that have been there for quite some time. They are not making money in the same way that they did just 10 or 15 years ago. So there are some very big changes going on.
Okay, I should also note that David has a PhD in history of technology, so if you say there's something new going on, then I think we can trust that claim.
Well, yeah, history only repeats itself so often,
Okay, and so why is it?
Can I add to
Please,
this?
please.
That I think what is not mentioned here is the strongest driver worldwide today is the water shortage. So for years you have been trying to treat the wastewater to protect the environment. That has been the main reason. Organic, phosphor, nitrogen, now pharmaceutical residues, POPs. But it has been a shift because the water shortage is so severe, especially in the countries where we are dependent on economic development. So therefore you must rethink, and what we try to do now in our applied research for 5 years is to shift the mindset, not saying that we develop a wastewater treatment plant, but we develop a production facility where you produce water that can be reused to farmland, industry, or even to groundwater like in California. And you must produce energy, and you must produce nutrients. And if you do that, you will have new income to what you are doing. And it totally shifts also what you are saying about paying upstream. Now you have new possibilities to run this facility. And I think this is very interesting. And you can do it then in small scale and large scale, and it will be combination.
You could even, if I can add to that, you could even say that much of the logics that we have known to be sort of untouchable for quite some time in this sector doesn't seem really to hold true any longer, in the sense that some consumers are now much more active part of production, for instance. And if you look at the wastewater treatment plant, and that's exactly as you're saying, Östen, we have had a situation where that one, the treatment plants have been there to take care of should we say, a problem of just getting rid of a residue, or so to say. But this is now changing so that we have wastewater treatment plants that are being, for instance, net producers of energy through biogas production, for instance. And I'm sure that if you go out and ride around on the buses here in Stockholm, you will notice that these buses are all run on biogas. So it's becoming now a major game changer also for some of the utilities. The wastewater treatment plants now have to start looking at themselves as potential energy producers, not just a place where you take care of the unwanted, so to say, rest products of urban structures and so on.
And Östen, can you point to any good examples of real business opportunities arising at the intersection of the water and energy service provision?
You have a lot, like in Sweden, we have more than 130 anaerobic digester out at the wastewater treatment plant. So we started to use them to minimize the amount of sludge. And then we realized that we produce methane. And in large cities like Stockholm, Gothenburg, Malmö, and so on, you upgrade the methane concentration and you can use it as a fuel for the buses or for car. In smaller cities, you produce electricity from this. And now for many companies, the income from this is as high as you can have from the water treatment. So it comes into conflict with the way we have setting the price. Because in principle, you are not allowed to produce energy. You should only treat the water. And now it will be even more interesting to upgrade the amount of biogas by taking the organic waste from the citizen and produce even more. And from the beginning, the interesting thing is that the driver was the bad air quality in the cities. So if you should give a good advice to China and India, which I try to do, is to introduce biogas transportation in the cities, because then you minimize the amount of small particles at the same time as you introduce renewable energy. And therefore the tricky thing is to have a good communication between the different sectors in the city, not only thinking about water issues, but thinking about transportation, thinking about waste handling. And that is a tough thing, because everywhere in the world you are organized in a city, someone being responsible to treat the water, to produce the water, take care of the waste, transportation and so on. And they must come together and find solutions. And that has been a good start with this introduction of the anaerobic digester here in Sweden. And it has been very successful, I would say. Another example is also to use the energy in the outlet water. In Stockholm, for example, we use for the district heating and district cooling, we use a lot of the energy in the outlet water from the biggest sewage wastewater treatment plant.
If I can add something, I mean, we see exactly these kind of examples are really showing why we also need to, have new ways of interacting across, disciplines, across organizational borders, and so on. Because if you go back 30, 40, 50 years, you would perhaps find that in a municipality, if we're talking about the Sweden case, but this goes for many countries, you would find that a municipality would have had water, sewerage, and energy, waste services all under the same umbrella. And then what we have seen over the 20, 30 years in the past year is that we have started splitting it up. And this splintering of the infrastructures into small compartments, separate companies, some which have been privatized, of course. You also need to look for the best way of running these companies so that they are performing well. But the splintering has also led to shortcomings in how you can capture the value which is actually there across the service chain. So yes, we are a little bit fighting a longer trend towards compartmentalization here, and maybe we need to start finding ways of bridging those compartments and speaking across borders simply.
Oh, that's very interesting. Perhaps this relates to my next question. Apart from developing a suite of new or adapted technological solutions, what else is needed to make change actually happen in terms of governance, funding, regulations, attitudes, ideas, norms, business models?
Yeah. Well, in fact, there's quite a lot needed, of course. One would sometimes assume that it's all about technology. Some people think that that's really how change happens, that you start with some technological innovation. Well, in one way it's true, because technology changes the relative prices within a system. It changes also where value is created and where the customers or the users can perceive there to be a value. Okay? So new technology can make it possible, for instance, to reuse water in a different way. But apart from technology, there's so much that has to change in society, in the societal dimensions. And we're talking about governance frameworks, for instance, because now if we have a wastewater treatment plant that is also becoming an energy producer, the first question is, are they allowed, according to rules and regulations, to venture into that business? Do their owners allow them to do it? Is it in their statutes, basically? Do they have a mandate to operate as a producer? Not necessarily. So that is part of the social dimensions that are so important. But we shouldn't just think it's all about the rules and regulations. It's also about attitudes very much. Especially if we're talking about reuse of water, reuse of fertilizers. And we all know that these pigs that I was alluding to in the beginning, they were consuming, of course, the excreta of horses. They were consuming even human excreta and a lot of other wastes. So how do we manage also people's expectations and risks and so on, and attitudes towards circular economies? There's a very big uphill struggle, I would say, to deal with attitudes and norms, not just regulations. So you could say, to summarize, there's the technology, there's the social dimensions, but there's also the psychological or mental dimensions. How do we feel about certain technology? How do we feel about certain practices? So all of those kind of things need to be there in order to make circular economy and these new businesses to actually work in water and energy circumstances, for instance.
I mean, is this a typical Swedish or post-industrial society phenomenon we're discussing here today? Or does this have any bearing on global sustainability issues? And why should anyone in Uganda, Bangladesh, I mean, you mentioned just in China and India where you do work. I know, David, you've done a lot of work in East Africa. How do you connect this from the industrialized to the developing world?
I can try to answer to let him, because we are advisor to government of India how to treat water in Mumbai and Delhi, and we have been doing that for 2 years. And situation is that in Mumbai they really have no treatment at all. In Delhi it's quite many treatment plants, but at the same time they focus this problem with water shortage. So you must also try to overcome, to think more long term and holistic. So I was in Kanpur, another city in Uttar Pradesh, in May, and then they wanted to develop the treatment plant to take away even more. And then they suddenly started to say, but now the quality is so good so we can reuse it. And that's the way you must try to turn it, so that you don't start silos, producing water with acceptable quality, but just going out to the rivers, to the lakes to sea. Because the water amount is not enough. And it is, in principle, much cheaper to treat the wastewater than to treat the seawater. So I think we call this eco-governance, meaning that you must have a leadership thinking about the whole city, not only talking about waterways, but look at the whole city to be sustainable. And if you do that, start to implement, solutions will come up, and you will have new agenda for what you should do. And if you are striving for the sustainable city, it's different than just to striving to treat the wastewater. And I think I'm quite optimistic about this, because it's happened a lot. The countries we mentioned, but also, for example, you mentioned Bangladesh. I think it's happened a lot in all those countries, and they also tackling the problem with flooding. Today we discuss about what's happening in Texas. There's a lot of water coming down, but you cannot collect it. So worldwide we have built up system where we don't have any protection with water to stop the water. So we must rethink also here in Sweden and other countries how to collect the rainwater. If we do that, we have enough water in many cases, but we must use the water more clever and start to think more holistic, as you said. And I think that's the way forward. And if you industrialize, as you said, you can do this also more clever if you connect it with the sewage wastewater.
Yeah, I completely agree. This is a global phenomenon. This is not about changes occurring only in the north or changes occurring only in the south. I think that some of the most important and most interesting places in the world to be and try to develop and understand what is actually happening in innovation in water and energy is perhaps the low income, the middle income, and especially the water scarce regions, of course. And especially, I mean, exactly like Östen is saying, that is also where the driving forces are much stronger. So on one hand you have got water scarcity, perhaps also energy deficiency, but you also have, shall we say, the lack of incumbent structure that doesn't hold back development in the same way that we are experiencing in the more developed or the richer part of the world. So here in Sweden, for instance, we have a lot of infrastructure already in place, and that keeps us back in one way. I also think that that is perhaps where we will see disruption. If we're talking about disruptive innovation, there will be disruption of the existing infrastructure or the existing models of providing water and energy, just because we have already existing infrastructure in place. Whereas in low-income regions of the world, there's less infrastructure, there's less institutional structures as well. So there's a greater degree of flexibility. And there's really some interesting things going on where we're talking about innovative practices. For instance, if you go into Kibera, which is the largest slum or informal settlement in East Africa, at least, in Nairobi, you find that there are already fantastic, interesting sites where, demonstration sites or facilities where people are turning toilet products, turning basically human excreta into gas that is used for cooking, for heating bath water and so on. So capturing the value through innovative practices and technologies can be done in a very different and very interesting way, also in, shall we say, more flexible and adaptive contexts in low-income countries. So for anyone who's interested in this, I think low-income and middle-income regions are definitely the place to be working.
As both of your organizations are doing so.
Oh yes, I mean we do have a lot of research, of course, going on when it comes to local innovation in water and sanitation, also linked to the energy and the value production in various ways. It's not just energy. We're talking also about, of course, how can we use water in a more clever way? How can we find new, not just technologies, but better business models also for involving consumers, community groups, and that is largely driven by new technologies. For instance, the ability to link up with community groups through smartphones and through the internet, digital monitoring of informal networks. Those very interesting things going on, and there's quite a lot we can learn, I think, also in the more developed or more developed in the sense richer and more stabilized and homogeneous type of
you mentioned the business aspect of this. So what would you say are the implications of this globally changing landscape for industry, and how can companies meet challenges in competition and develop their own businesses?
Well, I'm sure that Östen has some pretty good examples, since IVL is working very closely with the industrial actors, and so are we, of course, at the university. But I would still say, if I just paint out the broader picture, I think that this disruptive innovation is, as I said, is going to come. It's coming from the margin. It's coming from small areas. What the big organizations normally perceive as the periphery. That is where the interesting innovation is happening. So I think from a university point of view, maybe we need to also look at the peripheries more, see what's going on in terms of innovation. When it comes to the industry, I think that, yes, they are often very good at capturing this, these opportunities that arise, sometimes better than many other actors in society. So, Austin, I'm sure you have...
Yeah, I think that this is a tricky issue for many big companies nowadays, because they calculate on the huge market, but they will more and more compete with countries coming up with products with lower price and sometimes even smarter solution. And it also comes to the business deal. How do you do? I mean, we have many big European companies going around the world and help to do the investment and being paid by the tax for running this plant. And this model, I think, have problem in the future. And therefore, I foresee that most of them, as I know, they focus more now on the reuse of water, which is a very good idea. But they will more and more compete with a producer of equipment, especially now from China, but it will also come from India and other countries, which is fairly good for the world because you can lower the price. but it will also be more a mixture of small scale and large scale. I'm against saying that large scale is always good or small scale. You need a mixture, and we need to connect with also more activities. So you must have more split vision and see what is the problem you have to solve. It's not only to treat the water in the future, it is to produce water for everyone so that the industry can be developed. And from an industry point of view, for example, we are working with Volvo Geely in China. They want to have the factory with the lowest water consumption worldwide. And that will be a good driver for other industries in China to spread this message. And many companies, as far as I know, big companies going abroad, try to be the best in cloud to minimize the use of resources. And this is also very good for the countries where you go, because you then stimulate to introduce those solutions. But if you look at the whole world market in the water sector, it's giant, I will say. But there is also a trend, I will say, that you cannot be too big. If you have only a few very, very big companies, that will not solve the problem. You need also a mixture of medium and small size. And this will come, I think, for the developing countries much more.
So if you look at it from the perspective of knowledge producers like yourselves and the institutions you represent, what are the implications for you, for institutes like the Water Center and for IVL, for this changing landscape?
Yeah. Well, I can clearly see that we have some very important challenges to deal with, in the sense that we have, if you talk about universities in general, we have for quite some time become more and more specialized, and very much driven by our urge to excel in our specific and rather small scientific disciplines. So that has been, the modus operandi number one, so to say, for the past 50, 60 years of universities. However, now we face a different situation where we need to become much more integrative. We need to have integrative knowledge from various types of disciplines, not just, shall we say, bring in another one random economist into an engineering project, or a random sociologist into an economics project or so. It's actually really trying to listen and learn from other disciplines and work together. And so far we haven't really been, shall we say, trying hard enough. But I think it's really changing right now. And well, the creation of the Water Center at KTH was exactly one of those attempts to really try to bridge disciplines. And one could also say that rather than having to always excel and be, always at the forefront in very deep knowledge, sometimes perhaps it's, more important to be good enough, but to have a very good ability to communicate and work with others. And I also think that the fact that KTH, my university, and IVL runs the Hammarby Sjöstad demo facility together is also a very good example of how we need to work, where we can have new interfaces with industry and really work around problems, and then try, rather than defining the problem up front, internally in academia, we need to do it together with actors from many parts of society, and then use all kinds of skills to solve that problem. So yeah, we're facing some interesting challenges, but I think it's also extremely fascinating and extremely inspiring to be working in academia right now in this field, because there's so much happening.
We put more strength on showing in realistic condition which technology that works, and to also to optimize it. So our Sjöstadsverket, then we have the scale that this can be upscaled to full scale. So we are now testing for Stockholm Water the treatment for tomorrow with the MBR plant. We have been running for 2.5 years. And we do also similar work where we take away the pharmaceutical residues now with different technologies. This will be upscaled to full scale this year in 2 cities. We focus to optimize the biogas, and to do all this you need a combination of PhD students going to the depth with more applied researchers who are doing the practical work, and we also invite the industry to join. So we are working very close with companies like Xylem, with General Electric, with Malmbergs and other companies, and by that you can together develop new solutions together. But on top of that, we are run by the more holistic view life cycle assessment. So we also want to see the broader scope of water to be able to handle the water differently in the society, not only thinking about the technology, but how you combine the different steps and how you connect also the amount of water you have with the need you have more in real time. And this is also something that is missing, because it's those silos between. And then on top of that, we think we are a small country, so it doesn't change the world if we are on top. So we are also running a Smart City Sweden, paid by the Swedish government. So most people coming from abroad and want to know how we develop smart city. We try to tell them the story about eco-governance. We show them our experiences from water, and we also learn from them. And more this will happen. But you need to spread this knowledge to other countries, because it's very important to reach the climate change goal. Because water is something that is also using a lot of energy, as you know. We are talking about net producer. Many cities are far away. So if we can move it in that direction, it will also help for the climate change, which is the overriding goal for everyone.
And thus the need for disruptive innovation in water and energy, both. So thank you very much, David and Øystein, for joining us here on the Siwi Sofa. I think it was a fascinating, inspiring conversation, to paraphrase David. And hope to see you again sometime here on the Siwi Sofa.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in to the Siwi Sofa. Stay tuned for more episodes throughout the World Water Week.